I should have known something was off the moment I walked through her front door. The house was quiet, too quiet for a home with two kids. But at the time, I didn't think much of it. I was just the tutor, hired to help her son with his schoolwork. What could possibly go wrong? Her name was Claire. She was in her late 30s, an established businesswoman who had everything in order, or at least that's how it seemed. When I first met her, she exuded confidence in a way that caught me off guard. I didn't expect her to be so magnetic. Her presence filled every room, her voice was calm, authoritative, and she always dressed impeccably. It all started innocently enough. I came by 3 times a week to tutor her son, Michael. He was a bright kid, a little distracted at times, but overall, nothing I couldn't handle. Claire would occasionally pop in to check on us, offering me coffee or a snack, always polite and professional. But then things began to change. It was subtle at first. An extra long glance when she brought me my coffee, a gentle touch on my shoulder that lingered just a second too long. I told myself I was imagining things. She was older, experienced, and I was just the young guy hired to help her son. There was no way she could be interested in me, or so I thought. One evening, after Michael went to bed, Claire asked if I could stay for a bit to go over some additional tutoring plans for the upcoming weeks. I didn't think twice about it. After all, she was his mom, and we'd discussed his academic progress before. But that night, the conversation shifted. We were sitting in her living room, and as the rain gently tapped on the windows outside, Claire leaned back on the couch and sighed. "You know, you're really good with Michael," she said softly, her eyes locking onto mine. "It's hard to find someone he connects with." "Thank you, I try my best," I replied, my voice a little unsure, sensing the shift in the air. She tilted her head, studying me. "You're very mature for your age. I admire that." I felt my heart start to race. This wasn't the kind of conversation we normally had. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, trying to maintain my composure, but the tension between us was palpable. Before I could respond, she stood up and moved closer, sitting next to me on the couch. The space between us disappeared. My pulse quickened as she leaned in, her eyes never leaving mine. "I see the way you look at me," she whispered, "and I think you know I've noticed." My breath hitched. I should have stood up, made some excuse to leave, but instead, I was frozen. There was something about the way she looked at me, something that made me forget all the reasons why this was wrong. "Claire, we can't." I stammered, but my words felt hollow. She smiled, a slow, knowing smile, and placed her hand gently on my arm. "I know you felt it too, this connection between us." I couldn't deny it. From the moment I met her, there was something unspoken between us. But I never thought it would come to this. "We both know this isn't a good idea," I managed to say, but my voice was weak. The attraction I'd tried to suppress for weeks was now staring me right in the face, and I was losing the battle. Claire leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it's not a good idea, but sometimes the things we want the most are the things we can't have." Her words hung in the air, thick with tension. I could feel her breath on my skin, her hand still resting on my arm, her touch sending electric jolts through me. Everything inside me screamed that I should leave, that this was too risky, too dangerous. But at that moment, all logic seemed to slip away. "I don't want to make things difficult for you," she said, pulling back just enough to look me in the eyes. "But I can't pretend I don't feel something when we're together." I swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. I wanted to tell her that this was a bad idea, that it would only lead to trouble. But the truth was, I felt it too. The way she looked at me, the way she made me feel seen in a way that no one else ever had. It was intoxicating. I don't know what to say," I admitted, my voice barely audible. Claire smiled softly, her eyes filled with a mix of desire and understanding. "You don't have to say anything. Just think about it." She stood up, leaving me sitting there, my mind racing with thoughts I wasn't ready to confront. As she walked away, I knew that this was only the beginning. Our lives were about to get a lot more complicated. After that night, things between us became more charged. Every time I came over, I felt her eyes on me. There was an undeniable tension in the air, a spark that neither of us acknowledged out loud, but was always present. One night, after another tutoring session, Claire asked me to stay for a drink. The kids were already asleep, and I was about to decline, but something in her gaze stopped me. I sat down, and she poured 2 glasses of wine. As we sat in the dimly lit kitchen, the lines between us blurred further. The conversation was casual at first, but soon enough it drifted into more personal territory. "I don't know how you do it," she said, swirling her wine, "balancing school, work, and everything else. I struggled with it when I was younger." I shrugged. "I guess I just have a lot of responsibilities." She nodded, her eyes meeting mine with that same intensity I had come to recognize. "You remind me of myself when I was younger, driven, focused. But sometimes it's okay to let go." The way she said it made my heart race. She wasn't talking about work or school anymore, and we both knew it. "Claire," I began, but she cut me off, standing up and walking towards me. Before I could react, she was standing in front of me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her body. Her hand reached out, gently resting on my shoulder. "I know this is complicated," she said softly, "but we can't deny what's happening between us." I swallowed hard, every nerve in my body on high alert. She stood so close I could feel her warmth, her scent filling the small space between us. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could hardly breathe. I knew what was about to happen, and yet part of me still clung to the idea that I could walk away. But she wasn't giving me time to think. Claire's fingers brushed against my cheek, and when our eyes met, the pull between us was undeniable. My breath hitched as she leaned in, her lips barely an inch from mine, waiting for my decision. This was the moment of no return. I could have walked away, ended it right then. But the truth was, I didn't want to. Every rational part of my mind screamed at me to stop, to think about the consequences, but I was too far gone. We had crossed the line long before tonight. "I don't want to hurt you," I whispered, but even as I said the words, I leaned in closer. Her response was immediate, her lips capturing mine in a soft, heated kiss that sent shivers through me. It wasn't rushed, it was deliberate, as if we both knew how much this would change everything. The kiss deepened, and I lost myself in the moment. Nothing else mattered, her age, the risks, the fact that this was wrong. All I could think about was how right it felt to be with her. But just as quickly as it started, Claire pulled away, leaving me breathless. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of desire and fear, and for a second, neither of us spoke. The weight of what we had just done hung in the air between us. "I don't want to make things harder for you," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "But I can't stop thinking about you." I ran a hand through my hair, trying to make sense of everything. This is going to get messy." "I know," she whispered, "but I don't care." From that moment on, everything changed. Our once professional relationship turned into something far more dangerous. Every time I went over to tutor Michael, there was an underlying tension. We couldn't keep our hands off each other. Sneaking moments when the kids were asleep, stolen kisses in the hallway, quiet conversations that always led to more. We tried to be careful, but the risk of getting caught only made it more exciting. Claire's eyes would light up when no one was around, and I would find myself waiting for the next chance to be alone with her. It was like a game, but the stakes were higher than anything I'd ever experienced. I started spending more time at her house, finding excuses to stay later after Michael's lessons. Claire would always be there, waiting for me with a glass of wine or a knowing look. We never talked about where this was heading, but it didn't matter. We were both addicted to the feeling. But like all dangerous games, it couldn't last forever. One night, things spiraled out of control. It was late, well after Michael and his younger sister had gone to bed. Claire and I were in the living room, sitting too close, the tension between us thick as ever. She leaned in to kiss me, and before I knew it, we were wrapped up in each other, completely lost in the moment. But then, out of nowhere, we heard a noise, the sound of footsteps. Claire froze, pulling away from me as if she'd been burned. We both turned to see Michael standing in the doorway, rubbing his eyes, clearly just waking up. "Mom?" he asked, his voice groggy. "What are you doing?" My heart dropped into my stomach. Claire quickly stood up, smoothing her hair and trying to compose herself. "Nothing, sweetie," she said, her voice strained. "Go back to bed." But the look in Michael's eyes told me that he had seen enough. He wasn't a little kid anymore, and he could tell something was off. He glanced between the two of us, suspicion creeping into his expression, before finally turning and heading back upstairs. As soon as he was gone, Claire collapsed onto the couch, her face pale. "I can't believe this," she whispered. "What have we done?" The weight of reality came crashing down on both of us. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing with the possible fallout. Michael had seen us. Even if he didn't fully understand what was going on, it was only a matter of time before the truth came out, and when it did, everything would come crashing down. "I need to stop this," Claire said, her voice trembling. "I need to protect my kids." The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. She was right. We had gone too far, and now we were on the edge of ruining everything. Her kids were the most important thing in her life, and I couldn't be the one to destroy that. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to make things harder for you." She looked at me, her eyes filled with sadness. "This was a mistake. I let it go too far." I nodded, unable to find the right words. She was right. We had been reckless, caught up in something that was never meant to happen, and now we had no choice but to end it before it destroyed both of our lives. The next few weeks were painful. I still came over to tutor Michael, but things between Claire and me were different. The stolen glances, the quiet conversations, they were all gone. We both knew that what we had was over. Claire avoided being alone with me, and I did my best to focus on my job, but the tension between us was still there, lingering beneath the surface. Every time I saw her, I felt a pang of regret, knowing what we had lost. In the end, we both made the right choice. Claire needed to focus on her kids, and I needed to move on. But the memory of what we had, the spark that had ignited between us, it would never fully disappear. Sometimes the things we want the most are the things we can't have, and maybe that's for the best.